Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Deconversion Stories. Wait a second, that doesn't ring true for this episode, I don't think. Today, I'm speaking with my very good friend, the Quiet Gorilla. He's actually, we're almost neighbors, I would say, maybe something close to that.
Stone's throw.
A stone's throw here, it'll be a very small stone with a very large arm,
Yeah.
I guess we could say. But basically, Quiet Gorilla here is... never really been religious as he grew up secular. But you've told me that you've always been sort of had your questions about religion and why people are religious. So why don't you sort of take us back to the old days, when you're growing up and you didn't really even know what it was and you were introduced and you kind of, all the thoughts that were going through your head on people that fell for this crap.
To put it in context, there was a point in my life where I kind of dug into my own history to try to understand why I never had a religion. So as I kind of go over my history, I'll be talking about things that I only realized later on. So they didn't happen in the moment, but I was able to go back over my history and go, oh, that time, that moment, that kind of, like when you see these science fiction movies and there's that point in time and that kind of creates an alternate timeline. I could point to certain key times in my own history where I kind of think that is what led me down an entirely different path. And I started to realize that when I was in college. So just to put it all in context, both my parents were raised in families that had religion. So my father was the son of British immigrants and was raised Catholic, and my mother's parents were Irish and British immigrants, and she was raised Anglican, and not just Anglican, but high Anglican. So while both my parents had religion, they, because of the friction between Anglicanism and Catholicism, decided that they weren't going to raise their children with either. And so the whole question of faith was just off the table right from the beginning.
Hold it.
Yeah.
So you actually had your parents belonged to a belief system?
Yeah, my dad was Catholic. He even went to a Catholic church, and he was, working class Catholic in Montreal. And my mom was high Anglican, family of means. And so, they because the fact that my father was literally from the other side of the tracks, or as my grandfather thought, the wrong side of the tracks. My mother's parents refused to endorse the marriage. And so my parents eloped because of this whole friction between Catholicism and Anglicanism, and those with means and those without. And as a response, my parents decided they weren't going to do either. They weren't going to do Anglican and they weren't going to do Catholic. They were just going to just not do it. And so they themselves also stopped practicing their faiths. They just felt it was more of a problem than it was of a gift.
Wow.
So that was and in fact, I didn't really know or understand that stuff until I was probably a teenager, because they just didn't do it. Like I didn't know that my grandparents were Catholic or my other grandparents were Anglican. I didn't know that my mom's father was a deacon in the church. Like it wasn't something that was discussed, because my parents just walked away from it before I even came along. The other thing I think that's important is that my parents were they were in the right time frame to be hippies, but they weren't hippies. They were kind of what I like to refer to as proto-nerds. I mean, they were like nerds before it was kind of en vogue to be nerds. My father had been born premature, so growing up, he was always kind of scrawny and gangly, and he had to wear glasses from childhood, and so he became very bookish. Loved reading. My mom was an only child till she was 14, and while her parents were very social and outgoing, she is not and was not. And so she too was very much about books and reading and kind of spending time in your own head. So I came along to two young adults who had walked away from their own religions and whose whole world kind of revolved around learning and books and traveling and this kind of stuff. Although neither of them could afford to go to college. So my mom went to nursing school and became a nurse. And my father, after high school, went to work, as a clerk in the mailroom of a large multinational. So they didn't have formal education beyond high school. They didn't have a religion. All they had was a love for learning and for, exploring the world's mysteries through books, or if they could afford to, going and seeing like a lot of our summer holidays were going to museums, which I thought was normal till I visited other kids, and they're like, "You went where? Disney World? Where's that?" So that was the other thing that I realized probably set me and my siblings down this path. And then my mom read Benjamin Spock's book about child rearing, and it kind of advocated for, because you and I are from the same generation, right? So we're that first test case of the children of Spock, where parents are told, "Hey, just trust your instincts, kind of trust the child is going to lead you, and what is best for the child." So my mother interpreted that to mean that she probably shouldn't say no to us. So it was almost like she probably never said no to us. It didn't matter what we wanted or what we were thinking or what we were trying. The answer was like, go figure it out. So by the time I was 2, I'd been in the emergency room multiple times, once for being electrocuted when I stuck keys into a socket. And, yeah. Oh, it was like, well, why not? My mom's thinking, well, he's exploring his world. And then, I tripped the breaker and ended up burned. I ate all my grandmother's high blood pressure medication and had to have my stomach pumped. And then, a year later, ate a pack of cigarettes, spat out all the filters, and had to have my stomach pumped again.
I bet you had like some seriously smooth blood pressure, though.
Yeah. And so, I became a regular visitor to the emergency room, and even
they knew you by name.
Yeah.
Like when Norm walks into Cheers.
Yeah. Well, my mom actually was an emergency room nurse at first. So it was kind of like, oh, she's back with her kid this time, because what has he done now? And Jenna and I were talking about being children of nurses last week, about the fact that, when you grow up with a nurse in the family, it's kind of like you have to be near death's door before they're convinced that there's something wrong with you. So it kind of fostered the sense of, if I don't know, figure it out. And then, now they say this was an accident, but I think that it might have been a little bit more intentional than they give it credit to. The first house that they bought when I was a child was actually across the street from the public library. So their love of reading became super convenient, because anytime we would say to our parents, well, what about, they'd say, well, go figure it out. Like, there's a library across the street. And so we spent, and by we, I mean my siblings and I, my parents didn't make stuff up. They didn't lie to us. I remember quite clearly asking my mom when we began in elementary school talking about, human sexuality and the birds and the bees. And I asked my mom, like, is it true that babies, are in the mummy's stomach? And she's like, no, they're not in the stomach. Here's my nursing textbook. Read it. And so by the time I had, gotten to high school.
Well, we are atheists. That people say we eat babies. So.
We eat babies. Yeah, jelly babies, licorice babies.
Damn it! I'm still out of gummy bears. Damn it! You just reminded me.
You've had since Saturday to stock up.
Fuck, I know. Fuck.
Yeah. So
Slacking.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of people who read all the time, who were not, like, our youthful curiosity was not beaten out of us by our parents before we got to school, and we were encouraged to explore our world with abandon and to to search for the answers. And so I just kind of, that was the path that I was set on, because of the path that my parents had chosen for themselves as well as their children. And that's, I remember, sitting down and reading. And then I had a brother 2 years my junior, and the two of us were kind of like the dynamic duo, because we'd be encouraging each other to try to figure things out. And, if we didn't know the answers, one of us would go find it, or we go and explore stuff. And so my mom says raising, boys was easier than raising our one sister, because we were always in the garage taking something apart to figure out how it worked. But my father was saying we were worse because we never put anything back together. So it was kind of like, what happened to my stereo? Well, we took it apart to see how it worked. Well, then put it back together now. We're like, well, we're not sure if we can put it back together, but we do. So it was, we were terrible on our dad's property and toys, but it was a learning experience for us. The next thing I remember really quite clearly was, I don't know if your family did this, but in the 70s, there was like this big thing about, children's birthday parties where they bring in clowns or they bring in magicians or right.
Yeah.
So I remember clearly, and it was either my 8th or 9th birthday, we had Magic Tom. Magic Tom was a local magician that my parents would bring in for the birthday party, because my brother and I, our birthdays are 5 days apart. So we would celebrate our birthdays together. and we would have, all our friends to get in, and they bring in Magic Tom. And I don't remember if it was the first year or the second year that Magic Tom came to visit.
Now, hold on.
Yeah.
Your brother and you are 5 days apart. Were you like twins? And he said, you go first. And
2
then
years,
come back and tell me how it is. Oh, okay.
2 years and 5 days. So our birthdays are 5 days apart, but I got you. He's a very large human being. He's like 6'8", and so growing up, he was always pretty much the same size as me, and so everyone thought we were twins because A, we always celebrated our birthdays together, and B, we were always the same size. But in fact, I was 2 years older. So when people found out that no, he's my my baby brother, it was kind of like, right. Yeah.
Pull the other one.
Yeah. So we were celebrating our birthday. I was, 8 or 9, and he would have been, 6 or 7. And Magic Tom had come. And Magic Tom, I don't even know if he was a good magician, but he would, spend an hour or so entertaining the children and the parents. And he did what I now know as close-up magic. And I remember he was doing a trick, and he had everybody rounded in a circle in front of him. And I was standing off to his right-hand side, and he was doing something that had to do with like predicting someone's card. And all of a sudden, and I remember this, I had this memory very clearly of my eyes for a split second moving away from the hand where he was doing the trick to seeing where his other hand was going. And he was slipping it into his pocket of his jacket. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden at that moment, I realized it's not magic. This isn't magic. This is a trick. And at that moment, it was like this veil was lifted off of my eyes, and I realized that even things like magic, which I enjoyed watching, wasn't magical. That there was an explanation to it. And so I went to the library and I started reading all these books about magic. And then I would, go to the bookstores and I'd buy all these books about magic. And so I actually have still to this day a collection of books about magic. And I remember my parents after a year or two saying, well, are you going to do some tricks? And I'm like, what? And they're like, like magic tricks, because you're reading all these books about magic. I'm like, I'm not reading books about magic because I want to learn how to do magic. I'm reading books about magic because I want to know how it works.
Yeah, so I can debunk the fuckers that are on stage.
Well, and I just wanted to understand it. I didn't care to do it. I just wanted to be able to, I'd be able to watch shows and go, oh, that's how I know how they do that one. That's just a variation on this. And at that same time, and that was the mid to late 70s. I remember watching Uri Geller on TV, and he was bending spoons. And I went to the library.
That one where he tells everyone to put their broken watches on top of the TV.
Yeah.
And so mine didn't start, by the way.
I didn't care to do it. I just wanted to understand how it was done. So I went and got his book, and I read his book. And then it was around, that same time frame that I was introduced to James Randi. Yeah. And I got James Randi's books, and I started watching James Randi on television, and I started watching things like That's Incredible and In Search Of. And it was kind of like,
That's Incredible.
I remember these shows. So I
for people too.
And because my parents enjoyed learning, the kind of standing agreement in the house was we could stay up late to watch something on television as long as it was educational. So we got our morning dose of Saturday cartoons, but other than that, it was, it was like watching the PBS specials and Nova and In Search Of and all this kind of stuff. And then I would see something like Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, and I would go off to the library and I would find what I could and read everything about those things so I could try to get an understanding of what was going on.
Right.
The other thing that happened is I had cousins who were living abroad, and they would come to visit. And my cousin, who's a few years older than me, one summer was really into ESP and hypnosis. And so he was talking, he was telling me all about ESP and hypnosis and all this kind of stuff. And then I was like, okay, I don't know anything about this. So off to the library I went, and I started reading about ESP, and I discovered some of the studies that had been done in the 60s. And you're familiar with the Zener cards? The deck of cards. Yeah. So I made my own pack of Zener cards. And then I started going around testing all like my siblings and my friends. And then I had to learn how to understand statistics. And so that I was learning how to do math of, the results I was getting. So by the time I was 12 years old, I kind of had what I think was the foundations of kind of a skeptical worldview anyway, because I was taught to be curious. I was taught to look for answers. I was taught to go to books and to challenge the things that just didn't quite make sense. The other thing that I think was kind of formative is that Montreal is very ethnically diverse. And so I had friends who were, Jewish and Catholic and Christian and Muslim. And and I would go to their parties or go to their houses, and I
Did you
thought,
ever go to Schwartz Deli?
oh, well, okay, so true story.
Fucking love that place, man.
There was Ben's and Schwartz's, and they were like from like the 40s or the 50s, always kind of like you were a Ben's person or a Schwartz's person.
Right.
My family was Ben's. We were every time family would come to visit, we would have to go down to Ben's and get big smoked meat sandwich and a plate of fries. And I remember even taking my in-laws, about 20 years ago to Ben's, and my father-in-law being amazed at the history of this place because it still had the linoleum floor and the deli countertop and the pictures of all the famous people who've been there for a sandwich. And then they had a labor dispute, and the family that owned Ben's closed it. Like after 50 years or more, Ben's smoked meat closed. So now it's just basically Schwartz's. And you just can't find, although there's a place in Langley that does as close to a real Montreal smoked meat as you're probably going to find outside of Montreal. But yes, we were
have it shipped from there.
They do actually. Yeah. I asked again, because I'm totally unabashed about asking questions about anything. Like I'm like, okay, I enjoy your smoked meat. Where do you get it from?
Well, Kaplan's went downhill.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, I only eat there once.
Aussie's in Tawasin, which is really good. Aussie's Deli is great. They got oh my god, dude, they got the European smoked bacon there that is to die for.
It's a bit of a trip for me to go for smoked bacon.
Yeah.
Not that I don't like bacon.
Just go there and buy the whole fucking thing.
That's what put it in the deep freeze. So growing up, like growing up, like we would go to Ben's, we would go to Schwartz's. I go to friends who are celebrating Hanukkah, and I go to other friends who are celebrating Ramadan. And for some reason, I just thought that these were ethnic things. Like it wasn't anything to do with a belief system. It was just a cultural thing. Like some people celebrate Christmas at this time of the year, and some people celebrate Hanukkah, and they get presents for 12 nights, and we get presents on one night.
Eight. And it's Hanukkah right now, actually.
Right. Okay. So I didn't think that it had anything to do with any kind of belief system. I just thought it was just different cultural and ethnic traditions that we all followed. And that happened until I think I came back from someone's bar mitzvah. So that would have been 13. So I for some reason at the bar mitzvah, somebody made some comment about God. And I was like, wait a second, you mean this isn't just a cultural phenomenon? Like there's some sort of belief system that underpins this, and it has to do with God. And I started asking all these questions about like, what do you mean God? And the other thing, especially for anyone who's played D&D, my understanding of mythology, the first book I read was the D&D Handbook of Mythology. Mm-hmm. And so everything I knew about gods, of any kind of gods, whether they were Nordic or Greek, I came out of that. And so I knew all these interesting things about Zeus and Odin and Thor and Ra, and all, because I'd read this book because I was playing D&D in the 70s. And then I was like, oh, these aren't, for some people, these aren't stories. These aren't myths. These aren't like there's a basis of truth to some of this. So I got really interested in mythology. Yeah. And that's kind of the conclusion I arrived at. Like, these are all just old stories. And so when people started talking about the Judeo-Christian God, and I was like, but well, how's that any different than any of the other gods that I read about in D&D or any other mythos that I'd read? And I remember going to my father when I was about 12 and asking him about, why don't we practice these faiths? Why don't we have this God? And he and I having a conversation at one point I said to him, I said, I really don't understand why anyone would believe in someone else telling them that this is a thing. Like I had in my mind this vision of people sitting around in a circle and someone saying, and so there's this entity you can't see or touch or taste or feel and nobody's heard from, and it's responsible for all this. And I'm thinking, and all those people just fell for it? Like, I don't get it. And my father was he was a little bit rough with me because he said, you can't speak about things that you don't really understand or you don't know. And so until you know enough about
you're questioning. That's
right.
A little different.
Yeah. Well, so he then handed me his mother's Bible.
Oh.
And he said, so go read it, and then we'll have this conversation. And so I started to, and I don't remember how far into it I got that time, because I have gone back to it a number of times since. But I remember reading through Genesis and going, oh, this makes no sense. Like it really, I don't like, I mean, I was only in, I was in high school at the time. I was really super interested in sciences. I was taking all the sciences that I could. I have a member of our family who's a PhD in genetics, and I used to listen and have conversations with him. So for me, I had already been, schooled in the idea of thinking scientifically. And then when I was reading that it just didn't make any sense. Like I just couldn't, like it was just a story. To me, it was just another old book that was just a book of old stories that I just couldn't see how anybody could think that it had any basis in reality. And so from the time I was 12 till about 18, I just thought, well, it's just kind of strange. Like, okay, so some people believe that, there's different kinds of gods, and these gods are telling them different things, or there's one God, and this one God is telling different people different things. But because of the people who I associated with, both at school and at work, and just in my personal life, I didn't have anyone challenge me any deeper than the fact, well, you don't believe and we do believe, and, we celebrate Hanukkah and you don't. And then that's kind of the way it was.
You don't.
Yeah. I then graduated from high school. Like everyone else, I just kind of kept going. I was fortunate enough that I could afford to go to college because, of course, Quebec is a very socialist province, even within Canada. And so my college tuition was very low. I decided to study pure and applied sciences. I majored in math and physics. I did my college diploma in math and physics, and then at that same time, the family member in our family who was a geneticist, his lab discovered a gene that causes a genetic disorder. So he was like in the national news.
Cool.
Yeah, it was, and so I remember sitting with him on the back patio a few months after this, and asking him, like, well, how did you get there? And he said, well, lots and lots and lots of studying, and I kind of got more interested in biological science and health sciences rather than in math and physics. So I went back and I did another diploma in health sciences in college, just so I could add, the courses in biology and ecology and genetics and things like that.
Right.
But then I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had my college diplomas in hand. The person who I was dating at that time had been accepted to an American college, and so they were going to school about 6 hours away in the U.S. And I didn't feel like I wanted to go away to school yet. I didn't know what I wanted to continue to pursue because I wasn't certain exactly what I wanted to study. So I decided to pursue some paraprofessional training, and I went to train in emergency first response, and I ended up working as an instructor trainer as an emergency responder with the fire department in the city. I taught first aid and CPR and emergency response and things like that for 2 years, which in some ways was good because I think you get that excitement out of your system when you're young. If you're the kind of person who as my mom was terrified because I had this inclination that whenever anything was wrong or anyone was in trouble, I rushed towards it. She said ever since I was a little child, I didn't have the sense to know where my limits were. And so after 2 years of rushing towards, motor vehicle accidents or, fires, I realized that I couldn't do that for my entire life. And in fact, it was shift work. It was largely working shifts, long hours that I couldn't picture myself. And I remember thinking, by the time I'm 50, I'm going to be overweight and chain smoking and probably dying of a heart attack if I keep down this path. And so I made the decision I had to go back to school. But I had also was making more money than you probably should in your 20s, I think I was 2021. So you shouldn't make that much money at that age. And I
shouldn't, or
I had a nice car. I had whatever toys I wanted. Every weekend when I wasn't working on shift, I was driving down to the US to visit my partner. And I got stopped at the border every time because, like, why are you 20 years old crossing the border every time? What are you smuggling? I'm like, no. Well, how do you make your money? I work for the fire department. Yeah. And when I would be visiting them, whenever they were busy or in class, I was reading their textbooks because, like, here I am at an American college because that's where my partner's going to school. I'm not in school, but always curious and inquisitive, and reading is what I do when I'm kind of left to my own devices. And so after a year of, going down and crossing the border and reading all these textbooks, I decided that I knew what I wanted to study, but I couldn't afford to go to an American school. And so I started looking at Canadian schools and found that there was a university that offered a program in neuroscience and psychology on the East Coast of Canada. And so I applied. I got advanced placement because of my college education. And I announced one day at the dinner table that I was packing up in September and I was moving east, and I was going to go and do my science degree in neuroscience and psychology.
Cool.
And, so my parents said, well, we'll make a family trip of it like we do with everything else. We'll visit all the historical sites and see all the museums, like where Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone and the Cabot Trail. And so I moved east. I started my studies, and then it's just kind of was thought that I had understood that, pretty much the entire human experience was reducible to the brain. No matter what people said, it was like, wow, we can explain that between neuroscience and psychology. We understand how these things work. And this is like 3 decades ago. So we really didn't understand it, but I was convinced that all human behavior was reducible to neurotransmitters. And the question of, belief was just a psychological phenomenon. And, the question of addictions was just a neurological condition. And then in my last year, I had to do an elective, and I did an elective in sociology. And all of a sudden I was like, what? Wait a second. I've missed something here. You mean like this whole social science thing, like, interaction between groups and peoples and cultures, and like that might actually have some bearing on human behavior?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh crap. I'm chasing answers that I don't even know the questions to, but I just felt like I just needed to keep knowing. I was really lucky that because of my training, the university had actually hired me as the campus medic, and that paid for all my housing, food, and paid me a stipend. So going to school for me, even at a cheap school in Canada, was even cheaper because I had a job on the campus. And so as long as I was on the campus and I was working, I could take like forever. And so I thought, well, I guess I'm doing a social sciences degree next. And so then I did a double major in physical anthropology and sociology. Because I started to figure out, like, I'm missing gaps. Like there's a question out there. There's like this massive jigsaw puzzle, and I'm missing pieces and edges. And it's not just in what I thought it was in math or physics or neuroscience or psychology. It was in other things. And so I thought, well, I believe that, we've evolved from a common ancestor with the apes. And by studying physical anthropology, then I'd be able to kind of put our behavior into the context of our ancestors and look at, our living relatives now, like the chimps and the bonobos. And then, of course, sociology, just because it's kind of one of the oldest fields that we start to understand human behavior as collectives. Yep. And then as I was getting close to the end of that, I still didn't really know what I was going to do. People, when you go to school, well, what are you going to do with that? And my parents were always saying, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just learning. Like you've been telling me my whole life to be curious and to go to books and to take advantage of the opportunities to learn. And here I am. I'm still learning. I remember during the O.J. Simpson trial, my mom would watch it, in Montreal, and then she'd call me and she'd say, "Oh, did you see the person who testified?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, he was talking about DNA analysis." I'm like, "Yeah." She said, "Is that what you're studying?" I'm like, "No, that's what we call a criminalist. I've done some courses in criminology because I didn't understand where that comes from. And then after my social sciences degree, I ended up wrapping up a diploma in criminology as well. And so every time my parents were like, "Well, what are you going to do with all this?" I'm like, I'm not trying to do anything at all. I'm just trying to understand stuff here. There was a time there where I wrote a couple of papers on cults because I was watching the whole thing that was happening at Ruby Ridge and Waco. There was a cult leader situation in Ontario that I actually remember seeing the signs for their commune when I was in the 80s driving down the highway. And I thought, oh my God, that was a cult. And so I ended up reading and then writing some papers on that. I did some work on school shootings because I had the misfortune of losing a classmate at a cult polytechnic. She was one of my college classmates. And so I did some work on that. And the university that I studied at, there was a professor who was one of the 3 leading thinkers behind profiling. And I took some courses with him and ended up becoming his teaching assistant. And he suggested that I go to graduate school. So I'm like, well,
more school.
Well, why not? If people want to keep paying me to go to school, I'll just stay in school.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. So then I went to graduate school in sociology, and then near the end of that, I still had no idea what I was going to do. I knew I didn't want to go on and do my doctoral work because I have family members who have, and I think it kind of drives them insane. And I needed to kind of get something out of my system, and the idea of even more school after all that I had done was just more than I could handle. So I was given an opportunity to go work in a private company as a researcher, and I thought, sure, okay, I can learn, right? Someone is now going to pay me to ask questions and analyze the results, and so I took a job as an applied researcher, and I learned that most government research, at the municipal and provincial level, even at the federal level, is not done by governments. It's done by private companies. And so I got in on the ground floor of this private company and ended up doing the research for studies on homelessness and vulnerable populations, and doing work with the police at the grassroots level in the city. And it was shocking to me to see kind of the things that I'd only read about in books. Like, I lived in this bubble of academia for so long. When I was out on the streets, riding around with the police officers, and they were pointing out where, the prostitution happens and where the drug dens are. And I'm like, what? And they're like, where have you lived? I'm like, well, I lived in the city, but I never set foot off the campus. So it was kind of amazing for me to see that clash between those of us who just study things and just know things and teach things versus what's actually happening on the ground. And so I took some time to work in the nonprofits after that, and I worked as an applied researcher and a policy person for a couple of nonprofits. Then I had an opportunity to go into government, and I worked as an analyst and a policy person in government. And then 25 years ago, I got pulled back into the university, and I've been there ever since. So although I didn't kind of really become an ist, like I didn't go on to do anything where, you would say you're a biologist or that you're a physicist. I've ended up inside universities working in applied research or administration or policy work that became my career. So
Wow.
it was just kind of this weird trajectory through like learning. But it was when I went away to school that I met people from all around the world. And I remember clearly in residence having a conversation, a bunch of us, Friday night sitting around in the lounge, drinking beers and talking. And myself and this other fella who I'm assuming was an atheist, were talking about human evolution. And this guy said, well, we didn't evolve from monkeys. And I'm like, well, no, we didn't, but we evolved from a common ancestor. And he goes, well, no, like, I don't believe in evolution. And I thought he was kidding.
Wait, what?
Yeah. And I was like, what are you talking about? And that's when I suddenly realized that these other religions had these underpinning faith things. And I couldn't understand where it came from. And so I started reading all sorts of different religious texts. I took a couple of courses in religious studies. And I remember spending one summer just writing notes, because the other thing I learned to do, in school was like take lots of notes. So I tend to write notes and have a notebook with me all the time. And I just started to try to understand why I never had one. Like, how is it that I somehow managed to avoid any kind of religious exposure? Like, I knew people who were, of different faiths, but it never came up in conversation. Like, and I would be calling my parents and saying, why do we have religion? And that's when they told me, well, we chose not to raise you that way. And I'm like, well, but why do people
like your parents?
But it was like I felt like I was missing something. Like I was deprived of an experience that other people had. And then I couldn't understand why, like, what was the trigger that would have people believe in that where I missed the trigger? It's like I almost, somehow was on the edge of it. And I even saw religion as just a sociological institutional construct, right? Like, what is religion? It's a system. It's a system of rituals and beliefs and ceremonies, that's predisposed on a certain set of beliefs that is reinforced over time and historical. And I'm like, that's a religion. Well, it's not belief. Belief is different than a religion. And then I started wondering, well, what's belief and what is faith? And I was trying to build a worldview.
Faith is useless.
Well, and I mean, I actually constructed for myself at around that time this idea that, well, I have confidence in things that I think. And so if I say I believe something, I have zero evidence for it. Like, I reserve the word belief, meaning I have zero evidence for this thing.
Why? You can use the word belief in everyday vernacular. It's just, it's my belief that, unless something happens to it, the sun will rise tomorrow. And I believe that that's been proven every day.
Right. Well, for me, the way that I decided to build my glossary was, I think the sun will rise tomorrow because I have evidence that it has every other day, and therefore I have a high degree of confidence. So if I have any degree of confidence in something, I think. If I have zero degree confidence, I believe. And if I have 100% confidence, I know.
Why would you believe in something with zero confidence?
I know. That's why I never believe anything.
But if a scientist tells you a little bit about DNA and genetics, are you going to believe him?
I depending on what he tells me, I would think that what they're telling me may or may not be accurate because I have done courses in genetics. I've done DNA.
Okay, let's say he tells you something that you already know. So you believe that he's telling you the right thing.
Well, I think what he's telling me is correct.
Well, you know that he's telling you is correct.
Well, no, I don't know. I'd have to be 100%. Well, but even then, I don't know. So I like to say that I believe nothing, and I know.
Knowledge is a subset of belief.
Well, but to know something, I have to have for me, I have to have 100% confidence in my knowledge.
Can you have 100% confidence in anything?
Right. Therefore, I can't know it. I think a high degree of confidence.
Sure.
Yeah. So
I would say I know certain things to a 99.999%.
Right.
Whereas I never hits 100, but you're that confident.
Yeah. So I think that ... because I'm 99.9999% confident. If I was 100%, I would know it. Know it is an assertion of unwavering conviction, whereas thinking it. And the other thing that I realized in the way that I approach problem solving was that building confidence for the positive and then building confidence for the reverse, for the corollary, are two separate things. I don't see it as a teeter-totter. It's not like as one goes up, the other one goes down. One goes up and the other one may go up too. And it's kind of like, the bar meters on the old equalizers, that, I might have 60% confidence that this is a fact and also 20% confidence that it's not. So, how can I find more information that either supports or refutes this? And how can I find more information that supports or refutes that? So I don't see it as increasing confidence in one, proposition is necessarily decreasing, my confidence in the opposite. And so the other thing I found that I tended to build into my repertoire is going looking for things that disagreed with everything. So I might read something that reinforces an idea that I have, and then I go looking intentionally for something that's on the other side. And so when I was trying to understand, why it was that I was devoid of any kind of system of belief, I started reading Christian apologetics, and I was like, okay. I remember I asked someone to give me a book to read that was, Christian apologetics, and they gave me a book by Ravi Zacharias, and I remember reading it, and every couple of pages I go, okay, well, I don't know that. Like, he makes a point about something historical, and I don't know it. So then I'd have to go read about that. And thank God for the internet, right? Like,
thank who?
Yes, exactly. Thank you, everyone who contributed to ARPANET and then the modern internet.
Science.
Yeah. Science, because up until that happened, every time somebody would say something or I would stumble upon something that I didn't know anything about, I had to go to a library. And now, fortunately, I grew up I literally grew up on a campus. So I had lots of libraries, but I spent more time lying around in libraries because someone asked me a question. I'm like, I don't know. And I'd have to go and I'd pull down, and this is back in the days of card catalogs, right? So I'd have to, and I go, oh, the journal of, and I have to go find that journal. I remember someone asked me something once about Tourette's, and I'm like, I don't know. And then I had to go to the medical library, and then I had to, I spent like 3 days in the medical library reading about Tourette's. And now with the internet, I don't have to spend all my time in libraries because I can get that stuff and print it off and read it for myself. But I just, if I don't know something,
download the Audible version.
Yeah. If I don't know something and I was exposed to something, I would have to read it. And so it takes me 3 times longer to go through anything, because I'm constantly stopping. I don't know that. I don't know that. And then at the end of reading something, like the piece I was reading by Ravi Zacharias, I was like, boy, he's not a very good historian. He's not even a very good sociologist. So I'm not exactly sure how he's making these claims, because the piece, the information that he's supporting it on is really not done well. And I mean, I now understand it was kind of more cherry picked than anything else, but the skepticism was woven into me, the curiosity was woven into me, the resilience to kind of always be looking for other answers, and I just couldn't understand how it is that I never had any exposure to any kind of religious thinking. I mean, other than the fact that my parents, insulated us from it. But even when I went to school, I was like, well, how do you, like, well, I don't understand. I don't understand. And I mean, and that kind of is how I ended up back, here on YouTube, because I was there when the internet was being born. My father ended up working in computing in the 70s and the 80s. And I remember, we had our first computer in the 80s, and we were BBSing and, hanging out on Usenet, at that time. And I watched the emergence of the modern internet. And I was curious about how it was transforming the way that we created community. Because I know there was a lot of people like, oh, it's dumbing us down, it's the dumbest generation, and it's going to ruin the way that people think, and I was curious because, without getting into the psychology of how the way we construct identity, community is an important part of that. And if we're now using community that's moderated through, like a distance thing, where we're closing the gaps, that global town village that we created through this kind of telecommunications, it was going to change the way we constructed community. And in the way that I tried to explain it to people who are 10 years older than us, was that we oftentimes are limited by who we can form communities with. And so we don't have like a perfect fit, right? Like we've got some friends that are kind of interested in this stuff. Like I got my friends I play D&D with, and I got my friends that I go to movies with, but they might not be the same groups of people always.
Sure.
But the internet allows you to find near perfect matches, because it's well, maybe not billions, but it's millions of people out there. And so no matter what your thing is,
billions is accurate.
Yeah.
Just not every person on the planet.
Right. Well, not every person also, speaks the same language and hangs out in the same groups. But it is the internet made it so much easier for us to create communities where the interests that hold the community together are so closely aligned compared to what it was in the real world. And so being able to form those communities that spoke to your interests so closely, I thought was going to change the way that we constructed identity, particularly for young adults. And I became fascinated by our use of it and started to do as I do, watching it and, kind of sort of being on the edges of it and taking lots and lots and lots of notes. And then I was there when YouTube was born. I remember the first videos going up. I remember everybody kind of thinking, oh, this is going on. And then people started posting videos they caught by accident. And then people started creating content, skits or characters or this kind of stuff. And then vlogging happened. And I said, oh, people are not just using this platform to share incidental, videos that are funny and content, or skits or characters that they're creating for some sort of digital portfolio for their acting, but they're reaching out through this medium. They're trying to connect with other people who are like-minded and sharing something about themselves. And I don't know why. Like, why would you be vulnerable that way? Like, why would you record content and just put it out there for anybody to watch? And so I started emailing these people and I started asking, like, why are you doing this? And how is this transforming you? And some of them got back in touch with me. And so I started this kind of conversation with some of the very earliest YouTubers about their use of this platform and how it may be shaping the way that they not only constructed their own identity, but the way they reached out and connected and formed community. And this went on for a couple of years. They eventually convinced me to kind of make my own content. So the Quiet Gorilla, or the Quiet Gorilla channel, the first one, which I've lost access to because all my contact information is from my last job, and I don't have that phone number or email anymore. And I'm arguing with Google about giving me access back to it, but I kept all the videos and I reposted them on my new channel. That came because of my curiosity about how, and they were saying, well, you won't really understand the effect it has until you do it yourself. And so back over a decade ago, I made my first content on my first YouTube channel and just trying to understand this stuff. And then I realized that it wasn't as profound as I thought it was, and that all these naysayers were not seeing it for what I thought it was, and that is that this is just the current iteration of the way that we've always formed community. That we take technology and we use it to reach out and connect to others and to share the things that we create, and that's what humans do. And whether it's stuff we write on paper and put in the mail, and so all the internet did was it made it in real time rather than having to wait for it to arrive in the mail. It made it in full color and moving pictures and full on audio, and it allowed you to share it with millions instead of just one. There wasn't really any different than we had always done, and that Twitter was basically, as I said when I first got on Twitter 11 or 12 years ago now, I said it's the equivalent of standing on a street corner and mumbling to yourself, thinking that other people are paying attention, and they are, and I had two things happen. One, I wasn't interested in it anymore because I kind of realized, well, it wasn't anything super special that was going to affect us, but also that I laugh when I think about this. I thought that as the number of people that use these platforms grew, as the availability of inexpensive cameras and high-speed internet increased, that more and more people would come to this place for these conversations, and there would be a greater diversity of voices that would force us to be more critical about the information that we consumed. And that would be good for us as a species, that we would become more critical thinkers because there was simply more to choose from. We could be more picky about the things that we chose to believe. And you know what? I was wrong. Boy, was I wrong. But I didn't know that at the time. So when I closed my channel and I closed my notebooks and I kind of thought, oh, okay, well, that's not what I thought it was. I have a real job in the real world, and I need to go on and get back to that. And so I just logged out. Like literally, I just stopped for 10 years. I just walked away from this world, and then COVID happened, and I was bored at work. Yeah, I mean, as you and I were talking before we went live, my current campus is closed because of COVID. And so I'm literally bored because there's days where it's me and one security officer on the entire campus, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do now? Maybe I'll see what's happening on YouTube. And I logged back in, and I found the other thing that, and part of the reason that you and I ended up connecting is because when I logged out, there was very little Canadian content. I think there was 3 Canadian YouTubers that were of any degree of prominence. And so when I logged
Logic and
well, even those folks weren't there. It was I is Superwoman. I think.
Oh yeah.
Going. And then there was the guy that did the top 10. Can't remember. Was it Matt? I have it in my notes somewhere. But I was really upset there wasn't more Canadian content on YouTube.
Now
I know this is great. And of course, being Canadian, being socialist, pro CBC and all this kind of stuff, I always wanted to support Canadian-made content. But I kind of thought, what's happening on this YouTube thing. The other thing, and I did find it was happening early on because I was there for the whole, and I watched it, and Lacey Green, who was part of it, and I know Lacey personally because she was one of the people I connected with early on, and she was very gracious. Yeah. Oh yeah. We'll come back to that because it's a funny story. But I remember, I don't know if you remember this or if you know the history of the whole Venom Fang X and Lacey Green debacle and that whole.
I remember. Yes.
I watched that. I've got pages of notes about what was going on there because as that stuff was going on YouTube, I was here in my home watching through the monitor, writing everything down, going this is fascinating. So I watched the early days of some of this stuff, especially that early, very antagonistic atheist community. And I thought, okay, well, eventually there's going to be more voices and there's going to be more people and this stuff is going to mellow and it's just going to become the norm. People are going to use this to reach out. Exactly. Yeah.
There's a lot of us that are fairly laid back. I mean, I think my show is pretty laid back. And if you compare it to a lot of the other shows where there's the quote unquote, I don't really like using it so much, but the angry atheists, because it's not that they're. Sure, they might be a little miffed currently, but they're not angry people in general. They're just spouting out their discontent from being indoctrinated, right? And being stuck in something for so long. But yeah, there's a lot of them out there that like, what's his name? Fuck, one of the earlier. Shit. Yeah, is it the Angry Atheist?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guy's a bit of a dick, but anyway, yeah. Early on, he was pretty good, but then he just turned into this complete creepoid.
Yeah. Well, and so that's the other thing that I had to do is I had to go back over the history that I missed and start putting these pieces back together to see the things that I left off when I tuned out, and then all of a sudden reconnected 10 years later. I'm like, what's happened here with all these people that I thought I knew or that I kind of was watching and making notes about? Going back to the whole thing with Lacey Green. I reached out to Lacey at one point. I asked her why she was, using this platform, and she was, she was there about. She had no one else to reach out to because of the community that she grew up in, because of the religion that her family followed. She felt completely and totally isolated, and she was using this to reach out to people who could support her through her own deconversion. And I was like, oh, wow, I get it. I can see now how this is truly a community. It's a supportive community. And people can use YouTube and Twitter and these kinds of platforms to feel supported as they go through these stages, of identity construction and transformation in their lives. So I felt relieved about that. She goes on to university. She goes on to become a sex educator. She ends up, traveling around the world to different colleges. And then she happened to come to my last university. The Student Association sponsored her to come out there, and they had a poster. And I was walking through the Students Association building and saw this poster and thought, oh, someone is stealing Lacey's shtick. I know Lacey. And so I went to the Students Association and I was like, hey, guys, not cool. Like, don't say that someone is doing her thing. Like, no, she's really coming here. I'm like, this is like across the entire continent. They're flying her there. And I'm thinking, wow, that's so
you got to meet her in person, sort of thing, or?
But she never knew my real name. She only ever knew me as the Quiet Gorilla. And so I was like, this is going to be interesting because she did not know where in the world I was.
Dude, I don't know your real name.
But that's true. And so I thought, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna evoke some of my privileges as a university administrator, and I'm just going to invite myself to the event, and I'm going to sit there in the front row. I had the Students Association who was meeting her and picking her up at the airport, and deliver a letter to her. And I said, on behalf of the university, I'd like to welcome you. We're so excited to have you here to speak to our student body, blah, 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 blah. And I signed it with my actual real name and position. And then I said, oh, by the way, we've met before like 10 years ago on the internet. My pseudonym is the Quiet Gorilla. And so she came in, and after her talk, I went up and so, by the way, I'm the one that sent you the letter, and it was amazing. Like, it was just surreal for two people who had known each other for so long, and I'd kind of literally tapped out for a decade, or not quite a decade at that point. And so she hadn't heard from me, although I kind of knew what she was doing in her life because she'd moved from being a YouTube person to becoming someone in the fields that I was working in at universities, and so our lives kind of collided again. So that was kind of funny. But I started getting irritated by people who kept talking about, oh, it's not real, it's virtual, it's, it is real. It is as much of our real lives today as anything else is. It's
you and I are talking right now. Sure, it's over an internet connection, but we're still, you're at your house, I'm at my house. This is reality, and we're still speaking.
Yeah, I had someone just a few months ago when I said, they're like, oh, what'd you do last night? I said, oh, I spent a few hours on the internet watching YouTube videos like I did, 12 years ago, trying to understand what's going on. And boy, was I wrong 12 years ago about what I thought I was seeing. And they're like, oh yeah, my kids do that. I don't understand. They just watch people play games. And I'm like, you do know in the 70s when we had Ataris, we all sat around in the basement taking turns at the controllers, eating pizza and Ruffles. Yeah. It's the digital equivalent. Instead of us all being in the same basement together playing games, we're just
all in our own basements.
We're just connecting through the internet.
Man, my hot pocket.
Well, when we got our first modem, my mom used to always pick up the phone and disconnect it. We're like, Mom, hang up the phone. Oh crap. And we have to disconnect and reconnect.
Yeah. The old days modems. Yeah. Back when we actually called it modeming. Yeah, modeming, I swear, we used to get together because I was a part of a couple of chat groups called Sam Oben and Shoreline. And we used to get together and do modem meets. And you've never seen the biggest group of fucking people that look like they just didn't belong together getting together. We go see like Terminator 2 or whatever, go for coffee at Beano's or Denny's or whatever. And like we take up like half the restaurant and shit like that. It was great.
But like this is community, and
Yeah.
and all we've done is we've just changed the way that we're able to connect and create community. In that was actually connected communities was actually the topic of a TEDx that I was invited to give a talk to because of my work with what was going on in YouTube. It was like 3 years after I had closed my notebooks and everything. Someone had found out about what I did, and they were looking for someone to kind of put the context around the way that the modern world is creating, mediated communities through the internet. And they said, "Hey, didn't you do something about YouTube?" And like back, I'm like, "Yeah." Like, "Would you like to come and give this TEDx talk?" And I'm like, "Sure." I mean, like, I suppose. Like, I thought it was pretty boring, but I guess other people didn't think it was boring. So I think that this, I'd like to say that this is just normal.
It's more of that ape connection you were talking about earlier.
We're going to start a whole ape cast.
Ape cast? That's awesome.
Apes of the world unite.
Yeah. That's it. I'm changing my name to Neil the 604 Ape.
See? Perfect. Yeah.
No, I'm not changing my name.
So that's one of the reasons why I wandered back in, because I had time on my hands. I wanted to see what was going on YouTube. I wanted to see if some of the things that I imagined that it was going to do for us as a world came true, and I was wrong. I was very pleased to find that there was Canadian content. I was really pleased to see that there was a transformation in kind of the atheist communities that exist on the internet, because back then it was very, contentious and there was a lot of very angry people. And now it seems to be, and the point you were making earlier about people being, angry about the years that they've lost because of their indoctrination. I've heard that just in the last 6-7 months, so many times from so many people on so many different shows. I mean, on the one hand, it explains a lot that what I've witnessed, but to me, it's heartbreaking that people feel that way. Like, I wish I could somehow help people to unburden themselves of that feeling. I think it, personally, I think it's terrible that people feel that they've wasted their lives because they were led astray. So I mean, that's why I'm here, because I'm back, because I'm still trying to put these pieces together. I'm still trying to understand how it is, and I mean, like, I've never thought, that's the other thing that you and I mentioned. I never thought of myself as an atheist because I never left any faith. I never had it to begin with, and so although I understood what the word meant, I thought it was for like people who kind of had thought about it and turned away from it, whereas I hadn't even really thought about it in that sense, and I never actually used the word atheist, because to me, describing yourself as something that you are not, like an atheist, was like, why? Like, I'm also not 7 feet tall. I'm not 5 feet tall. I don't have brown eyes. I don't like the list. Right. Like the list of things that I am not is very long, and I wouldn't start with not someone who believes in a God or gods. So I never.
That's just a word that's used to describe someone that doesn't have a belief in deities. That's it. So
I actually remember the first time I used it to describe myself. It's because I was in the hospital having surgery, and the night before my surgery, they were doing all the usual kind of checks, and the person that was filling in the forms said, and what, I can't remember, I don't know if it was congregation or something like that, do you belong to? And I'm like, what? And they're like, well, should anything happen, which clergy would you like? I'm like, why? And they're like, well, are you Catholic? I'm like, secular, I guess. And the person looked at me like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'm like, humanist? Like, I don't know how to, like, I never thought of a positive way to describe my system of beliefs or thinking or being. And so I was like, we were at this loggerhead. Like, the person didn't seem to know what box to tick for me, because I was like, nothing. And then eventually I said atheist, and the person like, oh, tick the box. And I'm like, yes, I am, because what box do you put someone in who's never really been in a box? Like, atheist, I suppose. Like, so that was the first time, and even now, like, I don't know. I also didn't necessarily understand until I started reading some of the stuff on the websites that you and Randall and Godless Mum run, to understand, well, okay, so you don't believe. well, why? Apologia. Like, why are people so out there about this? And then I start reading some of the things that you're doing in society to change the way that I'm like, is this really a problem? And then I start reading. I'm like, oh,
it is
I'm so insulated from this. Like, I had no idea that, because I worked in government and it just never really came up. And, and I work because I've worked inside universities my whole entire life, we tend to be these bastions of like free thinking. And again, like we don't think of these things, like, or at least I don't think of these things, and they don't come up in the conversation. So to see the kinds of things that are really happening around the world, particularly in countries that are far more ideological or theological, to see the work that needs to be done, I now understand why we have, activist atheists. But for me, my activism was more about vulnerable populations. I worked with homelessness, I worked with youth, I worked with, disenfranchised populations. But the religious aspect just wasn't there. So I this has led me to a whole new understanding of some of the challenges that we're still facing as a community and as a society, because I just didn't realize the influence that religion had, because I just somehow managed to dodge it.
I hit the coin button at the same time Mikey did, so we just neutralized each other.
See, buttons. Mikey, you're not supposed to be letting him play with the buttons.
Speaking of Mikey, we are coming to the close of the show. Let's bring the producer into the show. Once again, he's like, damn it.
I'm just like, oh, hi, guys.
Oh, are you doing the chimp smell in his finger? I love that. That made me laugh.
I'm recording the technical difficulties.
Oh, are you? Awesome.
It should be pretty funny. IQ, check your shit if you're listening.
I haven't seen him in the chat yet, which
he's
is
always,
weird because he usually pops in.
He's always around.
Is he? Is he omnipresent?
He always knows. He's like, his ear's going to start ringing.
So I gave Faye some pictures. Actually, Faye just popped into the chat, and I gave her a bunch of pictures of me, and she's going to work on some memes for the show, like Neil 64 Atheist, with some of my pictures, and we'll pick and choose some that we can use as little type banners to put on like Twitter or Facebook or whatever, right? So it should be pretty fun. Thank you for doing that, by the way, Faye.
We need the one that says "Anyways, guys."
Yeah, that's going to be a T-shirt, anyways, guys, for sure. Like, I've got some ideas written down here, but
hashtag coins koozies.
Hashtag coins koozies. Yes, yeah, I think that's a great idea too. But quite really, we have done the hour, so I think we should jump to the after party if you're game for that. Which I'm
absolutely sure. Yeah. I warned you that once you uncork that bottle, I can't control.
All right. Well, first of all, dude, thanks so much for doing this. I know you didn't have a deconversion story, but I think we covered a lot of interesting ground about religious belief and people that are involved, and of course, dude, I had no idea you were that scholastic. Like, I had no fucking clue.
I don't tend to kind of put it out anywhere. I think that the merits of people's ideas should be based upon the ideas and not necessarily what they've studied or what credentials they have.
Well, fair enough, but I'm kind of sitting here right now thinking, my bag is like some chemistry.
Hey, listen, it's not some chemistry. Like, yeah, I love Lego.
Me too, man.
Chemistry, like, yeah.
I'm waiting for the fart poop jokes. That's where my area of expertise.
Poop jokes. Me and my dad used to just crack each other up with that kind of humor at like the dinner table, like fancy places and stuff. We'd get looks and people, and we'd just be looking at each other, just giggling and shit. It was hilarious. But anyways, thanks everyone in the chat for hanging out with us. Unapologetically Me, it's good to see you. We're doing an after party if you want to jump in.
Yeah, get in here.
And all you guys out there, you're welcome to join us. Just let me know via Twitter or Facebook if you're not on Twitter, and I'll give you a link, and you can jump in here with us to have a little bit more fun. But always at the end of these shows, I'm going to do a few announcements here. Please don't forget to check out the links for the Quiet Gorilla below. Too many G's.
Gabilla.
Globe. Wasn't that the gorgeous ladies of wrestling? Is that what Glow was at wrestling? Yeah. Anyway, so don't forget that I am now one of the hosts, along with the wonderful Jenna Miu, who's in the chat with us right now, of the Nonprofits, which comes up on every Sunday between Talk Heathen and Atheist Experience. We're part of the ACA show lineup there, which I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of a secret here. At one time, they were going to adopt my show into the ACA playlist. But there were some technical issues and some proprietary issues that I wasn't really willing to let go that easily. So we decided against it ultimately. However, on many of their shows, they do shout out my show. So I appreciate that.
And you're not in Austin.
And I'm not in Austin. And if I could be, man, honestly, it's the only other place in the world other than where I used to live in Israel, which is Ramat HaSharon, which is a great little town. I'd live there, here, or Austin.
Chicago. Oh.
And Amsterdam. In Amsterdam is fucking awesome too.
But what about the heat? It's like I can't do heat very well.
Oh, I can do heat. Cold doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I can do cold, no problem. But heat,
Yeah,
above 26.
You're from Montreal, though, dude. So, your winters are way worse there than they are here. So I'm a West Coaster, so I can do the heat and the cold.
Yeah, no, I by July here, I'm like looking for caves to hide in.
But I would definitely live in Austin if I had the opportunity. And you know what? I said to my boss at work one day at GFL Environmental.
Oh, you were.
I am the lab tech and chemist for GFL Environmental. I also recycle the antifreeze. So I take the used antifreeze, send it through high heat distillation, literally over 3,600 degrees that we boil this shit at. Separates the water, the contaminants, and the glycol. We reclaim the glycol, add back the clean distilled water, and then I add all the chemical adpacks and the colorants and the Bitrex. Bitrex, by the way, is what keeps animals from drinking the shit now, because glycol, which is a sugar-based chemical, it's sweet, right?
Sweet.
Yeah, it's sweet. Yeah, sweet. What's your tattoo say? Never mind. Anyway, so
mine's in Latin.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
I got an old one met back in the day when I still believed in like astrology and shit like that. I got this thing that's got my Libra symbol in it. So I just tell it it's just a little alien looking dude in a spaceship. That's all. Whatever.
So what you're saying is all the stuff that I send off the campus, because GFL is our contractor, you end up with.
Yep.
So I'm sending
any waste, antifreeze, any oil, any shit like that. I test it for PCB contamination, and I also test it for viability to reclaim.
So the next container load that we send down, I should stuck notes down inside there. Dear Neil,
my
this
dear
is for Neil. Yeah. All my oil for Neil.
Yeah, you can do that. But the other guy that works in the lab is Brolio, and if he gets it, he's going to come running into my shack and go, Neil, look at this here, right? Because he's from Chile. So, yeah, but he's the other chemist that works for us too. He's actually the chief chemist. He's got the actual degrees. I just have diplomas and certificates for what I do.
You're the one that really does the work.
Oh, well, no, he does too. He does most of the oil stuff. I do the oil, the few that come in during the day, and then I mostly handle all the antifreeze waste and contamination stuff there. Right. But yeah, that's basically what I do. I am a shitty chemist, is what I call a hack chemist, is what I call myself. Anyways, I was doing all the closing stuff here, guys. We Welcome to my show.
Guys. Anyways, guys.
Yeah. So don't forget to head over to and sub to the nonprofits if you haven't already. Also, Randolph, who's also in the chat, and I, in sometime in the new year, are going to be starting up a new call-in show called True North Talk. It'll be one of the few that Canada has ever had. I learned the other day that was already one, but it's no longer going. Yeah, so we'll be doing it. And of course, thanks to all my wonderful patrons. It's because of you guys that the show just keeps getting better. And also to my wonderful moderators, which is pretty much everybody in the chat's got a wrench these days, because I was totally Oprah with those things. And on Tuesday, December 22nd, my show won't be on because I will be joining the Empathetic Atheist on his show. So look for it there. I'm not entirely sure of the time, but I think it's probably going to be around this time. And yes, as Mikey just pointed out, new schedule Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays rather than Mondays and Wednesdays, because I required those Wednesdays to be there for the nonprofits. Except for tomorrow. I won't be recording one tomorrow because Randolph and I, and Simply Secular is going to come and hang out with us too for a little bit, are donating blood tomorrow.
Yay.
That's what we're doing. And yeah, I mean, Gorilla Man, if you're not doing anything tomorrow at like 5:30, come down to Vancouver Oak Street and hang out with us.
Well,
Yeah.
we're in the bubble now.
Cup of coffee, anyways. Oh yeah, well we have the face mask and the distancing and shit, no problem. But anyways, hello, True North Talk is your refrigerator ready? Not those kind of calls. Tons of lively mice, apparently.
Not yet,
right? Not those kind of calls.
It was tons of dead mice, but then tons of mice had to switch it up. So it's lively mice today.
Yes. All right, so we're going to end this now that it's 10 minutes overtime. Jesus, this is getting to be as bad as my after parties. 45-minute warning, kids.
Oh, I got to make one of those too.
45-minute warning. Yeah, that's got to be a thing now too. All right, we're going to do it now. So there is a link to the after party below. If you want to go over there and hang out in the chat, you're welcome to do so. Thanks once again, Quiet Gorilla, for being the guest of honor today, man. It's
my
great
pleasure.
with you. And like I always say at the end of the interviews, first off, with the COVID-19 thing going on, and yes, we've got viable vaccinations now, guys. There's 2 different ones that are being put out there. So I'm going to be there. And a quick sidetrack before we end. I talked to my sister, who's a home care person. Oh, I'm not getting it. I'm like, what? Why? I don't trust it. Why? You're not going to be able to do your job if you don't get one. You realize that, right? Oh, no, they can't force us. If you're in healthcare or home care, they sure as fuck can.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, she's not going to be able to do her job if she doesn't do it. But anyway, that's her business.
But why? But like,
I don't know why. I tried to ask her. She said, well, you and I think differently. I'm like, oh, yeah, we do. You see, I actually trust medical science.
But I don't understand. I don't understand something, and I've been pulling down all these papers about conspiracy thinking, and I don't. I've got like 6 books back there on my shelf about conspiracy thinking and denialism, and I still can't get my head around this.
I know it's mind-boggling.
I'll talk to you guys about it in the after show.
Okay, please. Yes, if anybody can explain that to me.
For my sister. Oh, I thought you were calling me sister, which I didn't have a problem with either. But anyways, we're gonna get into the after party. So head down to the link there and head on over there, and we'll see you there shortly. I'm going to take a quick break, as I always do. I go have a quick smoke because I'm a dirty smoker, and I always throw a couple extra beers in the cooler, and we'll see you guys over there. All right. With the whole COVID-19 thing, like I was trying to say, be well, be safe, and above all, be kind. And like the late, great Christopher Hitchens once said, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. We'll see you guys next time.